It's the After Show with TelecomTV's Guy Daniels and Ray Maistre.
Yes, it's the After Show, the end of day 3, the final day of this year's DSP Leaders Summit on OpenRAN. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and we are live on Telecom TV and also broadcasting to your favourite social media channels. Joining me now on the After Show is Editorial Director Ray Maistre. Hi Ray, time to unwind after this week's panels and keynotes?
Unwind? Absolutely not. The OpenRAN train has left the station and is picking up speed. And I'm preparing for a flood of activity in the sector, and I reckon I've just got the fuel to keep me going. So there we have it. And of course, I'm pumped for today's session as well and looking forward to asking questions of today's panelists.
Oh, the sign of a well-organised cocktail hour. Premium spirits, we like it. Of course, we need the help of our audience, so submit your questions now using the Q&A widget on the After Show Summit pages. And while you're there, please do take a look at our poll on OpenRAN technology. This is your last chance. Polls are closing soon, subject to legal challenges, of course. Okay, time to meet our guests. And joining us in today's After Show are Yago Tenorio, who is Head of Group Network Architecture at Vodafone and is also Chairman of TIP, the Telecom Infra Project. Azar Saeed, Global Chief Architect with Red Hat. Fernando Serioni, who is VP Product Management and Marketing Service Providers at Robin.io. And O Sune, VP of R&D Mobility at the Open Networking Foundation. Welcome, everyone. Now, whilst our online audience start typing in their questions to us, here's one we prepared earlier, as they say. Not all operators are enthusiastic about OpenRAN's potential. Is the OpenRAN market overhyped? Are some of the industry analyst projections just too optimistic? Ray, what do you think? Is there a danger that OpenRAN might end up not very impactful and just a niche area of development and rollouts?
Well, I think as with other disruptive models, it's getting a lot of attention right now. And the hype is coming right now because there's a great deal of operator interest in OpenRAN's potential. And it's going to be a while before we can see the true time frames and the scale involved. Let's not forget that operators around the world, including OpenRAN's biggest supporters, are investing billions right now in traditional 5G radio access network gear. But will OpenRAN be the next WiMAX or PBT? I don't think so. The industry is changing and there's a great deal of substance behind the current developments. But let's see what our panel thinks. Fernando, is there a possibility that OpenRAN becomes a little more than a niche architecture and a model that plays just a minor role in communications technology?
Hi, how are you? I don't think so. I agree with what you just said in the sense that there is a lot of substance and movement already behind this. And I would say a few data points, right? So you see Oran Alliance has the specifications sent out some time out. You see TIP doing plug test and interoperability tests. We have mobile operators that already have services running even before 5G. We have some networks already running 4G. Or even other technologies already on this technology on OpenRAN. So I think that this is going to be much more than a niche. You see already a lot of commitments from, as you said, the vendor community as well. So you have smaller vendors that are providing innovation, but also you see some of the bigger vendors that have made announcements, well known like Nokia and Ericsson both have announced that they will be embracing OpenRAN in the years to come. So I think there's enough critical mass in terms of interest from operators, investment from vendors, and a good, robust set of specifications that are available out there, and a good demonstration on real-life world networks. Think about Rakuten, Dish coming with this, of course, Vodafone and others that are doing, making a commitment to launch their networks with this technology.
Okay, yes. Yes, Azar.
Hi, Ray. I think you said it right, which is that that train has left the station, which means, yes, I think Fernando already articulated in terms of number of people coming together this time. But more importantly, there's also an ORAN SC software committee that's actually looking at code for Open RAN. And so they've started to develop, a RIC RAN intelligent controller. They've started to look at some of the XApps that run on RIC. So it's not just about providing a specification for people to implement, but it's also, proving their point by actually developing and delivering some sort of reference code so that people can actually do it. And that's really what drives the market, in our opinion. If you take a look at the open source model, the entire open source model is all about running code. And that running code actually drives an impetus into the market in terms of how, things get adopted. So in addition to the specifications, it's the real code.
Okay. Oz, I saw your hand up there as well.
Yeah. So in general, when we are as we are moving towards 5G, the most important thing that we ought to realize is we are also expanding on the types of use cases that 5G or a mobile network is going to deliver. So that effectively means the speed of innovation will need to increase as well. And at the core of OpenRAN is disaggregation and SDN. And those two, when combined, are the true catalysts for innovation. And at the same time, as these innovations come out, you need also a means of very rapid onboarding of these features. So the feature velocity is important. So bringing in the cloud principles in terms of CI/CD, etc., into this whole thing is actually what OpenRAN is, and that is going to give us the true 5G that we want. That is way beyond just providing enhanced broadband service.
Okay. Yago, did you want to come in here at all? I mean, Vodafone's already made some Open RAN deployment commitments. Are you convinced that this is going to be more than just a niche architecture in the mobile infrastructure?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I'll mention one thing that I think we haven't mentioned yet, and I agree that with everything that's been said, which is one of the main benefits of doing this and bringing Open RAN is to diversify the supply chain, is to create more alternative and to widen the ecosystem. That will not go away as a reason for doing this. And as of today is the best, if not the only way to do it. So I think it'll stay. I think we passed the point of no return, and this will not be niche. I think it'll be mainstream.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's a very clear answer, clear message from today's panel. I think we got roughly the same kind of response yesterday. This was a question that we asked yesterday and got a lot of good responses. So we brought it forward today, but we got plenty more questions, some from yesterday, some fresh ones from today. So Guy, over to you for the next question.
Yes, thank you, Ray. And we received this one about an hour ago. So thank you for sending this one in. Could Open RAN ultimately make it easier for large enterprises to build their own networks and bypass CSPs? Oz, have you got any thoughts on this?
So, great question. The private enterprise 5G is a greenfield network. So, building on what I just said, because it is a greenfield network, effectively, you need a solution where enterprises can scale things up as they get more and more comfortable with this new paradigm, and also add new features as they figure out exactly what the business model around this is. And that effectively requires an open RAN architecture. But at the same time, if we flip this over, because private enterprise networks are effectively a greenfield deployment possibility, that is also fertile ground for Open RAN to grow roots. So I think both are going to enable each other and help each other out.
Yeah, thanks, Sos. It's good to think about these private enterprise networks as greenfield sites. Yago, you like to come in and comment on that one?
Yeah, I think from a carrier perspective, I think large enterprise are not bypassing CSPs not because they can't, but because they don't want to. Maybe that's what I would like to think. I would like to think that we are providing good value to them in terms of value-added services, in terms of expertise in building their private networks, which, we can surely, can do better than most of them. So the same as I would not build my own fleet of cars, I would expect that a large enterprise is not building their own network. That's to start. Now, I think as another reflection is, apart from this, OpenRAN is not making it easier for anybody. So if you're an enterprise and you want to set up your own network, it's much easier to buy integrated from an integrated service provider than it is to try to assemble and do the system integration yourself. So I think it'll add choices, which is a good thing, and it'll benefit the enterprises at the end as well as the operators. But it's not necessarily a tool that they can use to become independent from the carrier, I think.
Great. So just because theoretically you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. There's a whole raft of other reasons and factors involved here. Thanks for that. I think unless anybody else wants to comment, we should move on to our next viewer question. Ray?
Okay, yes. So again, this is another one that came in late yesterday that we didn't have time for. And the question is, what do the panelists think that the first OpenRAN innovation use cases will be? What impact might OpenRAN have beyond just having lower cost deployments or opening up the ecosystem of technology suppliers? So Azar, let's start with you. What areas of innovation can we expect as OpenRAN becomes a bigger deal in the market?
Thanks, Ray. I think OpenRAN actually provides a platform for disaggregation of hardware and software components. When you do disaggregation, history has shown that you then start to build hardware and software in an independent way, which actually drives innovation as time goes on. Now, having said that, of course, cost was one of the primary factors why people looked at OpenRAN to begin with. But when you actually disaggregate that completely, now you can drive, hardware capabilities independently and software capabilities independently, and use a cloud model to be able to integrate those things together to deliver an overall solution. Now, one of the things we're beginning to see now, for example, is OpenRAN architecture provides the capability to build a RAN intelligent controller. On top of the RAN intelligent controller, you can run new what is called as XApps. That's part of the ORAN specifications. Those XApps provide, new capability. So, for example, previously what was a closed system where the radio vendor did everything in terms of self-organizing those networks, the radio networks. Now, there's a complete new ecosystem of software players who can come in, look at that data. Things such as radio intensity on, how many bars do you have? What's your signal strength on your phone? And based on that, modulate what can be provided, what type of quality of service can be provided, what type of application can be actually eventually run on your device. That level of intelligence can now be brought in because now you have APIs that provide exposure to these radio parameters, that provide exposure to the infrastructure, and now you can run these type of different applications, and companies can actually innovate and bring in their solutions. There are some really new companies that have come onto the market that are actually looking at building these kind of XApps, and this is all because of opening up that RAN, disaggregating it, providing those set of APIs back, and then allowing people to bring in their new innovation.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Azar. Fernando, yes, I saw your hand up there.
Yeah, I fully agree with what Azar mentioned, and I would say in addition to that as well, you have, of course, the return on investment, the lower cost is important. Another area is that that I will add to what was said is about the ability to shorten the implementation times of the network, right? So think about the complexity of 5G is way, I would say, several orders of magnitude more than 4G was. So there's a necessity of add a component of automation into the picture that will contribute to simplify or hide those complexities, and also implement those networks and maintain those networks in a much faster way than we are accustomed to do so far. I think those are components that are important. And the last one as well is the ability to also do this migration or the mix of public and private networks, or public clouds, I'm sorry, that are at the disposal of the operator as well. So I think those are new technology advances that allow them to, it's a few set of tools and capabilities that were not available before. And that also further advances the technology and the ability to deploy networks in a more faster and more intelligent way, I would say.
Okay, interesting. Okay, any other thoughts on this topic at all? New areas of innovation, or should we move on to the next question? Okay, looks like we're going to move on. Okay, Guy, back over to you.
Yep, thanks, Ray. And we're sticking on the innovation theme here. Question is, Massive MIMO is key for 5G and one of the key pending solutions in OpenRAN. Massive MIMO in the monolithic architectures is a result of 5 to 8 years of R&D. So how feasible is it for startups to achieve this solution? Yago, how about I start with you, and I'll broaden the question out a little bit as well. How feasible is it for startups to offer competitive solutions with technologies that can take up to a decade or so to develop?
That's a really good question. And I think I've said many times, I think Massive MIMO is probably the hardest nut to crack on OpenRAN, and one that we must deliver in order to take on urban areas. So we're very focused on that. I think the challenge is fair. However, you don't necessarily need to think on startups. So a company that is formed around an idea of how to get Massive MIMO done starting now that OpenRAN is nascent. If you, for instance, look at the results of our RFI that we announced about a month ago, and that was a radio hardware RFI, and we announced the results publicly. And you will see the front runners on Massive MIMO category. Those are OpenRAN players who have Massive MIMO products already available, or they're going to be available next year. And we have companies like Airspan, like NTS, Xilinx, like NEC, others. And we analyze many. So we just named these few, but we analyzed several companies which you would not say they're startups, but they've been working on this for a few years. So in the traditional RAN architecture, they would have maybe been the providers of one of the incumbent suppliers to integrate their solution into a closed proprietary system that is integrated. But in the new world with OpenRAN, they will be able to actually put their solutions directly into the market and integrate with software from another company. That may significantly shorten that time, which is, I think, a good thing to kickstart. Now, that will not exclude companies to being set up around different ways to go about the problem. And for instance, there is still very little, there's a lot of research, but very little development done around how to apply artificial intelligence to the problem. The Massive MIMO problem, I think it will be a very good one, where machine learning and artificial intelligence may actually end up being the final best solution. So maybe the second wave of companies that may last 5 years or 6 or 8 based on that concept, or maybe not. Time will tell.
Thanks, Yago. It's fascinating to think that small companies with clearly defined core competencies could now, thanks to OpenRAN, go direct to operators rather than through the larger vendors. Oz, you want to come in on this one?
Yes. So when we actually talk about Massive MIMO, we can sort of disaggregate the problem into components, right? So there is definitely RF antenna expertise that is necessary. But then there is a signal processing aspect, which basically, depending on the network state, tries to optimally leverage that hardware technology. And then there is the automation part, which is effectively looking at the network from a higher level and utilizing the hardware plus the signal processing technology to maybe mitigate interference or increase the quality of experience for a given user. So when one nice thing about Open RAN is it also enables us to disaggregate a complicated problem like massive MIMO into hardware, software, and even within the software, the intelligence and the automation. And you could easily imagine a startup zeroing in on a subset of the massive MIMO problem in the Open RAN space and innovate around it.
Okay, yes, indeed. Thanks for that. Well, we are at about the halfway stage here. So, Ray, perhaps we should take a quick break from the questions and have a look at our polling numbers.
So yes, we've had a poll during this week's OpenRAN Summit, and we've asked the question: when will an OpenRAN architecture be able to deliver an equivalent carrier-grade performance to that of traditional radio access network systems? And as you can see, and this has changed a little bit during this week, but still throughout this week, the main response, the most popular response, has been by 2024. So within the next 3 years or so, we're at 42.4% now of people voting think that we're going to get equivalence. But of course, as you can see, it's kind of spread. There's 14% is pretty high to say that it already can. But if we look further down the stack, there's a core. There's always been a core number of people who believe that Open RAN technology will never be able to match what comes out of the traditional system vendors. So a good mix of timelines there, but it seems clear that there's a majority of people believe that over the course of the next 5 or 6 years that we're going to see real equivalence there, and I think that's probably reflected in some of the industry analyst projections as well about where CapEx is going to shift and how spending patterns are going to change. But of course, this is all crystal ball stuff, and it'd be interesting to ask the same question next year and see what kind of response we get. So thanks for voting. And Guy, this poll is still open, isn't it? People can still go and still add their vote to this poll.
Oh, yes, it is, Ray. They can. There's still a little bit of time left before we close the polls. But Azar, I think you want to come in on perhaps our poll findings to date.
Yeah, no, actually, I was amused at the question that was phrased. I think if people are reading too much into that question that says, when will Open RAN replace 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G, the answer may be never. But if you phrase it as, when will it replace the traditional 4G RAN, then the answer could be a lot sooner. Because I don't think Open RAN's focus is to actually deliver 2G or 3G capabilities anymore. And 2G and 3G is almost on its tail end. It's already being, frequencies have already been farmed out towards LTE and 4G. So that was the only reason I think some people may be reading that question too literally and saying, okay, it's never going to happen because 2G and 3G will never move to an Open RAN model.
Yeah, thanks, Azar. And Yago, you want to jump in on this as well?
I want to kindly disagree. I think as an operator, there is this notion that you can overlay a new solution using Open RAN or simply from a different vendor to do your 5G or maybe your 4G and your 5G, but not your 2G or your 3G. On 3G, I would agree that it may be less of a topic because at the end, we're going to shut it down before we shut down 2G. So by the time that Open RAN becomes mainstream or we roll out massively, you may not even need 3G. So I would agree on that. But 2G, is going to stay for the foreseeable future. Is a good layer to carry the voice. There are IoT devices out there that is, it'd be very costly to replace. So at the end, having a 2G system occupying part of your spectrum, or even 2G, 3G, if you may, from a different vendor, and then overlaying an alien system that you want to do 4G and 5G on it, it's just not going to work. So this is one of the, I think, misconceptions that are out there. When you roll out OpenRAN, you have to actually take on the whole single RAN stack and replace what's on site. So you have to do a full swap out. And in that case, you may need 3G or not, but you're surely going to need 2G.
And people ask us, why do we have these polls? And this is the reason, because it stimulates debate. Thanks very much. Yes, and as we just said, you can still get your views in and contribute to the poll. We're not quite closing it just yet. And please, there is a little bit more time to send in questions. We do have another 15 minutes or so left of our program, so we'll try and squeeze in as many as we can. Speaking of which, Ray, do we have a new question?
We do. I'm in danger of repeating myself here, but I thought Fernando put his hand up there wanting to comment on the poll. Or have I missed that again, Fernando? Did you want to comment on the poll?
I think I would agree with Yago. I think definitely you see the state. There is definitely the all G is something that OpenRAN, even when everybody's focusing on today, of course, all the benefits of 5G. The remaining technologies are going to take some time to phase out, and I think that is something that has to be considered. And there is technology innovation being done that can support all Gs as part of the deployment, right? So I think this is a valid answer that I shared with him as well.
By the way, I voted for 2024.
All right. Okay. There we go. So we know at least how one person out of the near 100 we've got so far has voted. So okay. So actually, we've got the next question which has come in just this afternoon, is kind of related to this really, because the question is, multiple speakers have talked about 2024 as the best time for when OpenRAN will be deployed in commercial networks. In the meantime, many operators will deploy traditional 5G radio access networks and have a large installed base by 2024. And this is what we're seeing now. What is the strategy then? Is it a switch or replace with OpenRAN, with multi-vendor RU, DU, CU, and RIC, or will investments be still so new and fresh that this wouldn't be feasible, or the CFO might not sign on it? How is this going to work? Is there going to be areas of OpenRAN in fresh areas development? How long will the current deployments last? Yago, can you shed some insight on how this is maybe going to phase in? What's going to happen with the investments that are happening right now?
It is a very fair point indeed. But listen, there is never a perfect time or a perfect window of opportunity to get a new technology in. It happened when single RAN first came in. It happened with the remote radiohead before its time. It happened when Huawei came in as a new option to Europe. I think the investment in the network is a never-ending story. So you may think of 5G as a big wave of very strong investments concentrated in a narrow time. So there is 1 or 2 years and then everything is done. In reality, I think deploying a new technology in the network is a bit like keeping the Golden Gate painted. So once you finish in one end, you start with a new wave on the other. So arguably, it is true that, of course, if OpenRAN would be absolutely ready to take on urban areas before you even start to deliver the 5G to our customers, and it would be completely, in parity with the incumbent solution, that would be ideal. But chances are it's not going to happen. So if you put that together with what I just said on the previous question, which is if you want to roll out OpenRAN, you have to take on everything that's on the side. You have to replace the entire radio kit for a new one. Then, yeah, it's a conundrum, but it's not new. It's always been like this. OpenRAN, the reality is today, we think it's ready to take on rural areas. 5G will come soon, at least on FDD, and then we will be able to take on some urban areas that can't wait for massive MIMO. And then hopefully in 2022, we're estimating that we will have good massive MIMO solutions, and then we will roll out in urban areas. Will we have finished rolling out massive MIMO with the incumbent solution in urban areas by 2022? No, I don't think so. So there'll be a space. Will we have to equally eventually swap out some of the kit that we rolled out in the first place? That is possible. Now, there is always a chance that you can rationalize and then move it to the areas where you're keeping your incumbent supplier. So that shouldn't be a huge financial problem.
Okay, interesting. Okay, great. Thanks for those insights, Yago. Does anybody else want to come in on this question at all in terms of timing and how the deployments might happen? Or should we move on to the next question? I think we'll move on to the next question because we've had some more coming in. Guy, over to you.
Yes, we've. Well, this question's just come in a few minutes ago. Azar, I might ask this of you first. Beyond open interfaces, what, if any, is the importance of open source to the success of OpenRAN?
Absolutely, Guy. Open source, so I think I mentioned briefly in my previous comment there in terms of innovation. Two things. First of all, disaggregation allows you to build things on a cloud platform. That cloud platform is now extensible not just from your core data center, but also into your far edge and remote locations where your OpenRAN components are being deployed, like the DU or like the RIC and the CU, for example. So that cloud platform is generally based on open source. And now with ORAN SC, the software committee that's actually building, people have contributing code there to build reference implementations of DU and CU, as well as the RIC, more importantly, that can drive, open source components from an OpenRAN perspective, so that people begin to use them. We actually have already had queries from large telcos saying, would you be interested in looking at this ORAN SC RIC implementation and supporting it so that we can actually go deploy that? Now, obviously, Red Hat is in the business of building platforms, not the applications or components that are on top of it. But I think there's opportunity. What I'm really trying to say is there's opportunity for people to take up, similar to the ONAP distributions, the ODL Open Daylight distributions, and take up ORAN SC based distributions and actually support them for people who want to actually go deploy that. So I think open source is playing a critical role. Open source, we all know, drives innovation much faster, drives capability, brings a community of like-minded people together. And more importantly, I think Fernando said it earlier, and so did Uz, is by disaggregation, you drive automation. By driving automation, you create autonomous systems that can then self-manage, self-heal, run in that area.
That's interesting, the OpenRAN distros. And we should explore that a bit further. Oj, do you want to comment about the role of open source in OpenRAN?
Sure. I mean, as you know, I am part of Open Networking Foundation. So we are a nonprofit open source consortium. You may also know that we have recently, announced SDRAN as a new project where a lot of our partner operators and vendors have already formed an ecosystem where we are developing a near real-time RIC, etc. So based on my experience with open source is the following. OpenRAN, beyond APIs, we're talking about, again, disaggregation and SDN fueling innovation. With RAN, standardization and specification is a very, very important aspect of how things get deployed in a multi-vendor setting. So when you tie the two, we are actually entering an area where software, the speed of innovation will most likely be faster than the speed of specifications. So we are going to move to what I would call a software-driven standardization in the RAN space. And as a consequence, the software community, the open source software community, being the leader in innovating and trying new things, and then feeding that back to ORAN Alliance and 3GPP and forming a cyclical innovation cycle is going to actually dramatically change how fast we bring in new innovation and to the new releases of standardization. So I believe in the open era, open source is going to play a very, very critical role in not only building maybe the different non-differentiated components for vendors to pick up and add their secret sauce for their own products, but also being part of the specification sort of cycle.
Sorry, no, one important point I think was raised was previously we were used to a model of specification drives implementation. In the open source world, it's quite the opposite. Implementations actually drive that cycle of specification change, which then drives new implementation and new innovation. I think that's a really important point.
Great, thanks, Azar. Anybody else want to comment on this one before we move it along? No, haven't missed anybody out. That's good. Ray, in that case, we might have time for one more question, I think, or two if we can squeeze them in.
Okay, well, we've got a number to choose from, but we're going to take them in order. So we've got a question that swings back to the systems integration debate here. With ORAN architecture being a labyrinth of different vendors, does the panel think it's good practice for the operator to work with a vendor agnostic or neutral systems integrator that will be the single hand to shake, the main company to work with? What are the options here in bringing all the disparate technology elements and players and innovators and developers together? So maybe Fernando, I can start with you on this one. How do you think the model is going to play? Who's going to be working directly with who? Or will operators, do you think, work with a much broader range of companies individually?
Well, I think likely in this case is not going to be a single answer for all type of deployments. I can imagine that some of the big operators will be able to tackle a multi-vendor ecosystem, which is a big benefit of this what we are discussing so far. I can imagine that maybe smaller operators may, given that they may not have the amount of people and resources, they may go with a system integrator as a way to get the full solution in one place. And in fact, we see a number of well-known worldwide system integrators doing from the point of view of consulting, as well as for the point of view of implementing or even designing the networks that they are involved in some of these networks. So I would say that there will be a mix of operators taking this themselves and at the same time complemented in some cases with system integrators that will be doing the compilation of the whole solution, or putting in some way, taking responsibility of the end-to-end. I see both scenarios there.
Okay, and Yago, you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, I agree with Fernando. I think that having a vendor agnostic single hand to shake is one of the options. It'll be one choice. For some operators, it may be the best choice. Some others may decide to take on the challenge themselves if they're big enough. And there may be other ways of doing it. So one of the vendors in the mix may actually prime the contract and integrate everything themselves and so on. I think one aspect that we need to remember, we must not forget that OpenRAN being a global movement is very important. Actually, more important than combining all these ways is how to combine them so that there is no duplicate effort. So if we stop at the model at which there is one agnostic player who's integrating this on a one-to-one relationship with an operator, we will probably destroy the benefit. Because frankly, I mean, the number of combinations, even if it can be big, but it's not going to be infinite. So what someone does in the US region may be very useful for someone in Asia, may be very useful for someone to reuse in Europe. So I think there's probably a space for someone to play the role of a central marketplace where whichever integration you're actually working on in whichever model, you can contribute it, and in exchange, you can also receive value from what other people are doing. We are looking at ways of doing that in TIP, and I think we are best placed to play that role. So it's a possibility.
Yeah, well, there seems to certainly be a gravitation, I think, around a smaller number of industry organizations. Goodness knows there's plenty of them out there, but we seem to be getting down to a core number now who are attracting the interest and the input from the community. And yeah, it certainly looks like it's going that way. Okay, if no more comments on that one, Guy, we are probably coming up to being kicked out of the studio, but have we got time for one more question, do you think?
I think we can squeeze one in. I'm just looking at the clock at the far end of the studio wall. I think we can squeeze one in. I've got a quick question in here. Let me put it to all of you, the whole panel, if anybody wants to comment on this one. It's a short one. We've been talking about network operators, vendors, systems integrators, developers, but how likely are the cloud hyperscalers to play a significant role in the development of OpenRAN? Anybody got a view? Oz, maybe I can start with you. Sorry to pick on you first, but maybe I can pick on you for a view on that.
Happy to. So basically, what is happening with OpenRAN is with disaggregation, certain components are being virtualized, and new actually platform components are being created in the form of near real-time RIC and non-real-time RIC. So, and as we know, that hyperscalers have started optimizing their cloud offerings for telco needs. So we see all hyperscalers actually having now new business verticals specifically geared towards telcos. So in that specific new vertical that hyperscalers have, I know that a fair number of them, almost all of them, are going to actually populate their cloud offerings, not only with just an infrastructure and maybe a container or a VM or orchestration environment, but also platforms in the form of maybe a near real-time RIC and maybe even some machine learning libraries optimized towards XApps, and offer that to the operators as a service. So this is definitely going to be a reality. So I can safely say hyperscalers are going to start playing a part in the OpenRAN ecosystem.
Thank you, Oz. Appreciate your answer there. And well, I think you all want to join in now, but Fernando, let me go to you next.
Yeah, so definitely agree with us said. So you see already, in fact, the initial steps of these hyperscalers doing so. So as each of them, all three of them have already a telecom division. They have people that are joining them from being telco vendors or telco operators in the telecom space. So definitely hyperscalers have a role to play. I think in many cases increasingly so. And you see also in terms of some of the upcoming big deployments, let's say in the US and other regions where hyperscalers are going to be a component of the network, right? To some of the on the cloud deployments. So absolutely, they will be running, having a big role. Now, I don't think that they will replace completely. The mobile operator still has a lot of roles to play and drive those deployments. So I see them. Some partnerships developing there, and it will be interesting to see how this plays out in the coming years.
Indeed, thanks. And Azar?
Yeah, very quickly. I think both Uz and Fernando already described the hyperscaler structure and how they are organizing. What hyperscalers are really doing is expanding their footprint towards the edge. What that allows them to do is actually start to run some of those OpenRAN control plane functions at the edge. So it's not impossible for them to run, for example, if purely technologically, CU control plane, right? CUCP at that particular edge footprint. Now, can they go the next step and offer RAN as a service by partnering with the tower company or facilities company and actually do that and also start to run DU in an outpost type of environment or something else? It's not impossible to see that in the future, but certainly because of that edge footprint, they already have and they're partnering with telcos to actually build out that particular edge footprint by offering, to build that in exchange for co-location. They can certainly run those control plane components over there. So, yeah.
Great, interesting. And Yago, do you want a final comment on the role of hyperscalers in OpenRAN, or in OpenRAN in general?
Yeah, I think the growing need for a growing vast amount of general purpose computing hardware is undeniable. And that, of course, that will attract hyperscalers because that is the core of their business. So I agree with what my colleague said. I would add, I think, a couple of reflections. One is, make no mistake, Cloud RAN and Open RAN are two different things. So you can run your Open RAN architecture in a distributed manner, very much like today, and not using the cloud for anything. Then I agree that something like a very small outpost would still be possible, but it's more difficult. And equally, you can actually run your traditional RAN workloads on the cloud. And that is already possible with some suppliers. And if it's not for others, it's going to be possible very soon. So nothing stops you from centralizing your CU workloads and run them on the cloud. Now, for some operators, hyperscalers may be a choice, and they'll have a role to play. For some others, I think probably not, in the same way that hyperscalers have not penetrated in their core after virtualization. So I think, it remains difficult to see exactly to what extent they're going to penetrate, but it's an option.
Thank you, Yago. And yes, indeed, that brings us to the end of the show today. A big thank you to all of you, all our guests, for joining us for our after show program. All of our content is now available to watch on demand here on Telecom TV as part of our ongoing OpenRAN channel. But that is it from the OpenRAN Summit, our first but certainly not our last. Thank you to all our participants, sponsors and partners, and our viewers for making this such a success. We've had great feedback. Ray, final words on OpenRAN from you?
Well, I think it's clear that OpenRAN is here to stay. After this week, I'm not sure I'm here to stay, but I think it's fair to say that OpenRAN will not be an also-RAN. That's my final word.
Oh, nice. Well, we'll be back again in December for one more DSP Leaders event this year. Yes, we may not be able to meet in person, but that's not going to stop us from hosting our annual Great Telco Debate. So watch out for previews for December's Great Telco Debate. And you never know, Ray and I might just be back with another seasonal after show. If you've been watching us live, you may be interested to know that the United Nations General Assembly has designated November the 19th as World Toilet Day. Time then to flush all those proprietary RAN solutions down the pan. Thank you for watching the OpenRAN Summit, and we will see you again soon. Goodbye.
The after show was recorded in front of a live online audience.